good afternoon and good Sunday afternoon. We are in the middle of the summer. It is hot as heck out there, one of the hottest summers on record. But the good news is that it's just as hot in Vegas as it is in every other place in the country right now. That's what I call democracy. And we're going to discuss that with our guest, the Congresswoman from Vegas, here on The Rotation.
Well, thank you.
Sorry about that. That's our cold open. But I'm actually using my Caesar's Palace mug for coffee today, in your honor.
Nice.
As opposed to my Detroit mug, because that's where I come from. But Congressman Dina Titus of Nevada, it is so great to have you here right now. We have so many questions we want to ask you about. First off, well, let's introduce myself and Chris. My name is Gary Stein. I'm the political director for Suncoast NORML here in Florida, and our master of public health. And that's right. We have a different engineer today, so if you don't hear the sound effects,
we don't have the sound effects because I'm not broadcasting from the studio, Gary. So
assume applause.
Exactly.
And over there with the beautiful green sky over DC is our executive director, Christopher Cano, coming to us actually from Anne Arundel County, above the Beltway where he hits them below the Beltway.
Indeed. I appreciate it, Gary. But I got to give all props to our special guest today, the Congresswoman from Nevada, who is also the co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, Dina Titus. Welcome, Congresswoman. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was going to say earlier when you were talking about the heat that don't forget it's a dry heat out here in Nevada, not like back there because it's so muggy in Washington, Maryland area.
Yeah. The other day when we were, I was at a protest for my union, SCIU, and we were trying to, stop the big bad bill from going through, and it was 110 degrees outside in DC. It was just a rough one for folks. So, but I'm glad.
I went for my usual 2-mile walk with my wife the other day at I think it was at 11 o'clock at night. It was only 97% humidity and 97 degrees here in Florida. So
we need your rain out here in Nevada. We're in a drought.
Well, you're more than welcome to have it because we have plenty of it. We get plenty of that weather from that hoax, that whole climate change thing that doesn't actually exist.
But now you don't have anybody to watch it and predict it because they've done away with all the weather research services, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's one of the impacts we've seen from this current administration that has been hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the first questions I want to ask you is because you're now the vice chair of the Cannabis Caucus. How did you get involved in going into the Cannabis Caucus?
Well, I've been a member since it was first formed in 2017. And, Earl Blumenauer was such a champion. And so it's nice to follow in his footsteps. But Nevada has always been out in the arena of cannabis. We way back we did it for recreational purposes, for medical purposes. We've got lounges, so it just makes sense that it's a business here in my district that I would be engaged on it.
One of the things, Congresswoman, I recall back in like 2014 that was unique to Nevada, they were trying to push it through at the state level, was access to pets for medical cannabis. And I just found that just really forward thinking from a lot of other states because they are our loved ones in many ways and parts of our family. And I've even seen my mom's a little 17-year-old dachshund with all her health problems get access to it and help her with everything from seizures to arthritis. And I mean, if it's working for the pets, why do we have so many holdups among your colleagues in Congress of making sure that everyday hardworking Americans can get access to this,
Well, it's like kind of like gambling here in Nevada. There's a prejudice against it. Sometimes it's kind of cloaked in religious terms. Other times they say it's a gateway drug. Sometimes they just don't want to hear anything about it. But enough research has been done that we know that's not the case. And you're right, it does help with pain management. Dogs get arthritis, hip dysplasia. If you can help with their pain relief, we ought to be at least considering it, especially like the VA helping them with pain management there.
Now here in Florida, Chris and I have been working on cannabis legalization,
Mhm.
at least on a medical basis, for the last decade and a half. And when we started this, the legislators here in Florida could not run away from us fast enough when they saw us coming. I mean, I actually brought to them a woman who had been diagnosed with ALS in 1986,
Mhm.
and she was still alive to talk about it in 2015. And what was interesting, in fact, she actually was a hairdresser for Biden's first wife,
Oh,
which before she got ALS, which was kind of interesting. But we would bring her around, and they would run from us. What is the current zeitgeist as far as cannabis is concerned in D.C. with the legislators there? Because I'm certain it's a whole different ball game over there.
well, it is, and some things have changed, over time to bring people around. You're right. People didn't want to be seen as weak on drugs or weak on crime, so they didn't want to hear about it. But the best people to convince legislators are those who have their own personal story to tell, like the lady with ALS, or like a veteran with PTSD, or children who have certain ailments that can be treated with marijuana. Those are the ones who tell the stories. But what you've been seeing is that cannabis has been legalized in so many states across the country. It's usually not done through the legislature. It's most often done through the referendum process, because as you all know, 70% of people in this country support some kind of legalization or descheduling of marijuana. So you can get an initiative on. And the more states that have this happen and have businesses start in their districts are going to start paying attention to the cannabis industry as a legitimate business. And I think that's brought some people around as well.
That brings us to the bill that you are co-sponsoring right now, which was actually the second time for your chair, David Joyce, to put out, and that's the States 2.0 Act. And the States Act stands for Strengthening the 10th Amendment through Entrusting States. And of course, the 10th Amendment being that amendment that made us a federalist society, where you have each individual state that has it's basically its own sovereignty. What is the gist? What brought you guys to go ahead and file the States Act?
Well, there are a number of different bills that have been filed with different aspects of the industry, and that's just one of them. But it's like you say, the 10th Amendment leaves certain powers to the state to regulate, like gaming here in Nevada. We regulate that, so we can regulate cannabis use. And this bill would just say that the federal government can't intervene when a state has a certain law. They can't use the Justice Department to go after people for illegal action if they're in a state where it's been made legal. And that seems to be a basic, bare minimum thing that we can do. So the caucus is behind that. And it's nice to have David Joyce involved, because he's a member of the Appropriations Committee and also a former prosecutor. So he brings another element to the discussion.
Now, I would have thought that would have been the more liberal legislators who were involved in cannabis all these years, but you have Dana Rohrabacher on your side. Although he's from California, he's about as conservative as you can get.
Well, that's true, but politics makes strange bedfellows. So different issues bring different coalitions together, and we'll take it where we can find it. And that's why we keep trying to get more co-sponsors, and not just Democrats, but reaching across the aisle.
I noticed one of the co-sponsors is one of our friends, Greg Stubbe, who was a legislator over here in the state of Florida for a long time. I never always agreed with his choice of sports jackets. He kind of goes for plaids, which is kind of bizarre.
He's still wearing
it. And of course, Greg, he always was given some of the worst bills to file by the rank and file over here, the majority party. But he always seemed to buck up for it. But he does have a mind of his own at times, which is good, because I think otherwise he wouldn't be one of your co-sponsors right now. He's co-sponsoring it for the second time. He also has co-sponsored before.
Well, that's right. But also remember that Brian Mast is a co-chair with me, and he's from Florida. And he is a veteran, a disabled veteran, and he brings that element to the argument. And, he and I would have very little in common beyond the cannabis issue, and maybe testing on animals. We share that. But as far as foreign policy or being a MAGA supporter or whatever. We are certainly on opposite ends when it comes to those issues, but we're together on this cannabis, and he's a co-chair of our caucus.
One of the things that your bill addresses is something that's been our concern right now, and that is over the last year and a half, 2 years, 3 years since Biden announced it, they tried to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and we've been pushing more for descheduling. And this bill actually goes for descheduling, try taking it off the schedule.
Well, that's right. In an ideal world, you would deschedule it. You'd regulate it like alcohol, and it wouldn't be that serious of a crime like heroin like it is now. But more realistically was rescheduling. You're right, it started under Biden when Trump was in Florida campaigning, and y'all were doing that initiative down there. He said he was in favor of it, and that's why we got some hope that we could make some progress now, but that's kind of stalled. But rescheduling would still allow you to make some changes to the tax code, which is big for marijuana businesses. You know, they can't deduct business expenses like any other small business can, because they sell a product that's scheduled at level 1. If you made it level 3, then they could do that and be treated like any other small business when it comes to tax policy.
Now, Congresswoman, while we're on the subject of cannabis business, the federal laws that we're looking at don't necessarily create an industry. They just remove the barriers. It would be up to the individual states to determine what their systems look like. And, you know, one of the concerns that I've heard from a lot of folks is that they're feeling as though that this industry is developing in the various states to be un-American in a lot of ways, that it's developing a monopolistic style structure with license caps and limited folks being able to get into the market. And you see that mom and pop folks, small businesses can't get into it. And essentially, you got to be a large multi-state operator putting in millions of dollars to make that happen. What are your thoughts on that? Is it necessary for us to maintain a free market economy in this cannabis sector, or is this level of regulation the proper one to where we're limited the number of actors in it?
Well, I think the first step is at the federal level, allowing these states to move forward. And states have been ahead of the federal government all along, just like Nevada going back to 2010. But you're right. It was a criticism here in Nevada, too, because they put a cap on the number of licenses that they would issue. And you could only have, say, 10 lounges in the state or 5 in one part of the state. And so when you do that, and you hand out just a limited number of licenses, those people who can afford the big lobbyists and the big lawyers are going to come out ahead. So there has been that criticism. But one of the things you have seen evolve is that there are interest groups and organizations to represent smaller businesses. There's women in cannabis, for example, to be sure that they are represented when it comes to getting licenses and have opportunities to open businesses. There's a minority group of cannabis businesses that are doing the same kind of thing. So I think you're seeing an effort to attack that problem. And I think states, as they put in place regulations, and we have a regulatory commission here, just like a gaming regulatory commission, and other states do too. I think they're now more sensitive to how to address that so that it is a fairer market for who is eligible to and able to get those licenses.
I know there's a broad discussion and a lot of criticisms on what is the vehicle for legalization. You know, is it the allowing the executive branch to deschedule? You know, there's been a can kick back and forth over several presidential administrations of whether or not it's Congress that should be taking the action to deschedule. And you know, I talked to a lot of veterans, especially this weekend at the National Cannabis Festival in DC. And the main thing that our vets want is VA doctors to be able to openly allow people to recommend it. And many of the federal workers that I ran into don't want to be fired from their jobs if they're not in a safety sensitive position. You know, there are tons of folks who are not in the intelligence community and they're not in the operating nuclear missile silos, that they're not driving heavy equipment that, you know, may need this to help go to sleep at night, may need this for chronic pain, as we saw, and they're still at risk of losing their jobs at the federal level. And then there's tons of veterans who are feeling like they got to keep it in the shadows because they may not be in a state where that can happen, and they're scared of the repercussions at the VA. So just wanted to get your thoughts on where are we with getting the VA to actually address that in a meaningful way, so our vets can really take advantage of this therapy.
Well, in the Veterans Appropriations Bill, we're trying to get provisions in there to allow VA doctors to talk to veterans. Right now, they cannot even mention using marijuana in a medical way, which is a bad thing because it pushes people to self-medicate, and they may not know how cannabis interacts with other drugs that they are taking. Also, they have to then pay for it because it doesn't come through the VA. So now you're paying for some kind of medicine that you need. Another thing is until we're able to use it and study it, we don't really know what all the impacts of it are. And so we want to be careful along those lines. So I think the veterans absolutely should have access to it. We ought to have the doctors engaged, and we ought to be looking at how it helps with the PTSD as well as pain management, because in the past, and I think the VA does a good job, but in this area, they often have not known what to do. So they just give you some drug, here, go take this and go away. And it ends up with veterans getting hooked on what's a legal drug when they could be using marijuana that's not nearly so addictive or so potentially deadly.
And it's interesting that we have studies that go back a century that actually shows that cannabis can be used for what we used to call opioid poisoning back in the 19th century, and now we call it opioid dependency. And yet we have a hard time in Florida. They actually made it illegal for a medical cannabis patient to use cannabis in a rehab center, and yet it may be the way that they could possibly get off of opioids.
I know that makes no sense at all. More recent studies, though, unfortunately, have been limited. Ole Miss they've stopped those studies at Ole Miss because of a Doge investigation. But they used to say that you couldn't get much marijuana to study because just some old plants that didn't really show you what all the potential was. And most of the studies were looking for bad effects as opposed to looking for good effects. There's a policy study center here. There are a couple in California that are trying to get access to cannabis to use in studies, so you can say, look, here's the hard evidence. This is recent. This is what we know, and maybe help to make the argument based on those rational terms.
Now, they mentioned back in this bill that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here for a second. That you're going to hand over the cannabis industry to be regulated by the FDA, and you mentioned the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act of 1938, which brought the FDA into reasonable. Now, what is the reasoning behind putting FDA in charge? If you're trying to deschedule, take it away.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what the reasoning was. I guess that's where most of the drugs were regulated. But right now we're more concerned with the DEA and how they're addressing cannabis, and also, with the scheduling that's being done by, who's in charge of that now? Somebody named Cole, who is not proven to be very pro marijuana, and Trump, since the campaign, has backed off of it and not pushed the rescheduling, which seems to have just been stalled in the agency. And so we are trying to get that moving. You said, what's the perfect way to do this? I don't think we have the luxury of picking just one way. We got to do it through public information and getting public support like y'all do with this program. We got to do it at state legislatures, which is happening quicker than at Congress. Got to do it at Congress, and you got to do it through regulation. And I think that momentum is building, like you mentioned, getting some Republicans on board who might not have been there in the past, or who are real conservative on other kind of related things.
It's like there hasn't been a path to get this thing rescheduled or descheduled since the very beginning. In 1972, when the act was first put into, they mentioned the fact that it was the Attorney General who could deschedule it at any time. Yet we haven't had an Attorney General that has even come close to doing anything about it. So it looks like it fell back to the legislature. And I'm wondering if you feel that that will be the way we're going to get this done, because I don't see the DEA doing it through an
Well,
executive order.
it's certainly not currently under this attorney general. You'll remember back under Biden, he kind of directed the attorney general not to pursue these cases. Now, that's not the same as having it in statute, but it was the policy for a while during his administration. So they just kind of backed off and looked the other way. But you need to put it in law so that you doesn't subject to the whim of whoever might be in that position.
Of course, you remember Pamela Joe, the attorney general, was our attorney general at one point in time, and she fought every single cannabis measure that attempted to go into the ballot box, which is which is part of the path we've been trying to take for so many times, is put it on the ballot. And they're making it even almost impossible for anything to get back on the ballot. As you may have heard, this last year we had an amendment which didn't go through because it didn't meet that 60% goal, and they want to boot that up to make it even worse. So I don't see it happening as a ballot measure
in Florida.
In Florida,
you almost had it, but different states have different rules for initiatives or referenda. And so just because it didn't make it in Florida, I thought y'all were going to try it again, but maybe not. Maybe circumstances don't lend to that. But other states don't necessarily have the same rules as Florida.
Yeah, we're in an interesting boat in Florida with direct democracy and citizen-led initiatives. They're making it harder to get on the ballot. They're making it harder for grassroots campaigns to be able to have paid folks to collect petitions, and there's a million and one things they want us to jump through hoops in the state of Florida around it. But Gary, I wanted to reiterate your point that the current Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, while as Attorney General of Florida, did argue against medical cannabis going all the way back to 2014 when we first voted on it, and the Supreme Court ruled against her in Florida by a 4-3 measure. It's always seemed to be a slim margin when we do get it on the ballot. But even under previous Attorney General of Florida, Ashley Moody, who's now our U.S. Senator, her team also argued against adult use getting on the ballot. And ironically, they used a lot of the criticisms that we had of the current industry and the multi-state operators and the limited licenses, and try to shoot it down that way. Of course, the courts didn't rule in their favor. And the current Attorney General, who used to be the chief of staff to the governor in Florida, is also saying that he's confident they can strike it down. But they've not been successful in striking down amendments that have been well funded and have the legal teams to argue it. But like the Congresswoman said, in a lot of states, they don't have the luxury of direct democracy. Also, a lot of states who do have direct democracy can get it by a simple majority, like they did in Ohio. And so that's something that, moving forward, we'll see how that all shakes out for the rest of the country. I worry about our friends like the Carolinas, where there is no ballot initiatives of direct democracy, where they're literally going to have to have a big change in elections, but to see any progress on this at the state level. And right now we're at 40 medical states, with Texas being the newest one to expand their system. And we're at 25 adult use states. But again, even as we make progress like this, out of those, 40 some medical states, only half of them will keep you from getting fired from your job. And out of the adult use states, only about half of them will keep you from getting fired from your job, especially here in the DMV. In Maryland and Virginia, you can legally use cannabis, but you can still get fired from your job for using it. And so these are major concerns that a lot of folks have, especially veterans. Not every veteran is retired. Not every veteran is on a fixed income and collective disability. And folks have 9-to-5 jobs that they're going to every day, that they're putting in the work, and they're worried about being able to keep their families, but also needing this relief that cannabis provides. And so folks are really concerned right now, Congresswoman, of all the hoops they're having to jump through just to make ends meet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I sympathize. I do know what you mean. You talk about direct democracy. It's mostly Western states. Florida's exception, but mostly Western states where you have that initiative alternative where the voters can put something on the ballot. And then other places like the Carolinas, you mentioned, has to go through the legislative process. But something else you talked about that has broader implications are the hoops that they're putting in place to the election process generally. If you can't win an election, if it's going to be close or you're going to lose, then the way to win is to change the process. So it makes it harder for your opponents to get votes. And that means less early voting, means harder to get on the ballot, need more signatures, fewer places to vote. All of that impacts not just the marijuana initiative, but electing people who will go to the legislature and make the changes that you need. And so that's how they try to keep the folks that they want in power so that they can block something like that.
Now, our friend Chris Erickson, who's been commenting to us now, asked a very simple question. And I'm certain you can answer this for her. She says, keep it simple. File an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to end marijuana cannabis prohibition, like ending alcohol beverage prohibition. Complicated bills are stall tactics. But it's not that easy to do an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to end prohibition, is it?
Well, let me tell you how a constitutional amendment works. You introduce an amendment in the House or the Senate. Then you've got to get 2/3 of both houses. Now, not a majority, 2/3 of both houses. And then it goes to the states for ratification and takes 3/4 of the states to ratify. So if we can't even get something out of the House with a majority, you got to tell me how we're going to get 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of the states. So it sounds great, but it's just not very practical.
It's kind of like the Equal Rights Amendment. It hasn't quite gotten those ratifications yet. Florida still being one of the holdouts, I do believe.
Or the child labor amendment, Gary. I mean, there are tons of great civil rights legislation that were products of the the 20th century exploitation we saw that many states still have not ratified, and so that's something to really consider, the long process of state ratification. And then there's a time limit on that amendment too, that sometimes gets snuck in the language in the bills. So we got great things that states are just now getting around to because culture change, election change, and here we are. We're still kind of spinning our wheels in a lot of ways. And so yeah, elections at the local level matter a lot.
Well, if Texas can do it, though, Florida should have some hope because, Texas has long been a holdout on many of these issues that you're talking about. They can get this done. I think Florida, maybe you're going to have a change in governor. Who's going to be your next governor?
Well, hopefully not Byron Donalds.
Yeah, right.
No offense. I know him when he was Representative Donalds over here too. We sent some of our not so best up there to become congressmen, not including our friend Matt Gaetz and Stubbe, and recently Randy Fine, who we have clashed with several times, especially on the floor and talking about cannabis bills. We were talking about letting kids have access to medications for things like Crohn's disease, and he was saying, "So you want kids to smoke doobies in school, right?"
Yeah, they always jump to something extreme like that. But now there's an area that you've seen some research on epilepsy for children and how cannabis has been helpful there. So, let's talk about some real things, not some scare tactics like doobies in grammar school.
So basically, giving states more power, like the States Act does, do you think that will be the path towards eventual full decriminalization, legalization eventually?
Well, possibly, Republicans are always stand for states' rights, or that's what they say until it's some issue that they don't like. So that if they don't support that, they certainly will be hypocritical. I also thought that the banking bill might be a way to get something accomplished, because anytime you put it in economic terms, you talk about the industry, how many jobs it creates, how much tax revenue it raises, how you can use that revenue for schools or infrastructure, then that's a pretty good argument usually with Republicans too. Just talking about what's the right thing to do is not going to get you anywhere with that crowd. But if you talk about the money implications or you talk about states' rights, then those are stronger arguments on the Republican side.
Yeah, your bill addresses interstate commerce, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I know that's been a big concern because having to sequester your entire industry into one state makes it very difficult. And here in Florida, we have what is called vertical integration, which means if you're a cannabis industry, you have to go seed to sale. Basically, you have to grow it, you have to process it, you have to package it, you have to dispense it. It's all like as if Keebler had to grow their own wheat and sell their own cookies in a kiosk in various stores, as opposed to being able to make it and create a commodity. Will this allow cannabis to become a commodity?
Well, I hope so. That's the intent. If you come here on holiday and buy from a legal dispensary, and you happen to take a few joints home with you across the border to Oklahoma or somewhere else, then that's illegal, and that becomes a problem for you. But regulations, from state to state, again, vary. For example, in Nevada, you can't deliver to a hotel, or there are certain restrictions that keep gambling and cannabis separate. Even one provision in the appropriations bill that I worry a little about, but it's hard to argue against, going back to the comments you made about the doobies in grammar school, is that you can't have a dispensary within so many feet of a school. So you're going to always find some of that kind of regulation and restriction, at least for a while.
Well, Vegas always seems to find a way. I mean, it was great that they encouraged the Cahoot Nation to go ahead and open up Nuwu, which was a fantastic dispensary over in Vegas, and has done very, very well for themselves.
It's in my district. Yeah, that's quite an operation, and it's been profitable, and it's benefited that community, and it's one of the largest and most successful, I think.
And yet, because of the fact that you have to separate gambling and alcohol and cannabis from each other, that's made a difference with regards to creating what is called cannabis consumption lounges, because basically you have a dispensary who may be able to get a tasting room or a way you can test out the product, but you can't actually have a lounge where you could have both alcohol and food and cannabis all at the same time. Do you see that changing with something like this?
Oh, I do. I think that they're realizing that it's not going to be profitable for people just to sit around. You're going to want to have some food or something to drink, some kind of entertainment. And I think it will evolve into that. There was a time when you have to buy it. You can only smoke it in your own home. You can't smoke it in hotel rooms. Can't smoke it in casinos. Where are you going to go to smoke it? So I think you'll see that being a natural evolution. But when you do that, you got to remember too now that cannabis will come in competition with alcohol and like beer distributors, and people suddenly they're going to start looking real close at, are people going to start smoking joints instead of drinking beers? So that will be a problem. And gaming hasn't done enough research to know if people get stoned, do they still want to go and play the slot machines or not? So that will be a consideration when they look at it commercially. So it always has ripple effects.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that if you happen to be in a casino and you happen to have some kind of buzz on, you don't feel so bad when you lose.
Well, maybe that's the upside.
Definitely. And this whole thing about the commodity aspect of cannabis, and being able to move it across state lines are definitely major issues that the legislation addresses. But for a lot of critics and a lot of folks in the advocacy side, Congresswoman, they're worried about the folks who are already in jail for trying to make money in the legacy market on this. They worry about the nature of restorative justice, of freeing people, clearing records, letting people get back into the workforce. And so are there any other vehicles of legislation that are going to address that? Or are people still going to sit in jail cells while we go ahead and open this up for other folks to make money?
Well, our fourth co-chair, Ms. Omar, has always looked at marijuana from this angle of justice. You've got the prosecutor's angle, the veterans angle, her angle from justice, and then mine from the experience of Nevada. But also you've got Mr. Nadler, who chaired the Judiciary Committee and now is a senior member there, who has, I believe the acronym is the MORE Act, which would erase those penalties and get rid of those previous convictions that were for things that are now legal in many states. So yeah, that is part of one of the bills. So you've got a banking bill, you got a veterans bill, you got the states' rights bill, you got this bill that you just referred to. You've got my bill to allow research. Right now, universities can do some research like the Policy Center at UNLV, but they're scared to because they're scared the federal government will come down on them. We need to open up that research. So there are half a dozen bills that address the different aspects of it, and that's one of them.
Yeah, one of
I'm
the friends of our
glad we
show,
have that
Sue
bill.
Sisley, did some studies in regards to PTSD in veterans, and of course, she had to use the product from Old Miss, which she said was moldy, freeze dried, and and of no value as far as research was concerned. So she got some pushback from the federal government into getting her own research done, even though it was for looking for the positive things as opposed to the harm. And I guess it was the Controlled Substance Act that actually pushed the fact that all research had to be done into the harms of cannabis as opposed to the benefits. And
Yeah,
that's been difficult.
that hurts our argument. The more you have facts on your side, the stronger you can make your argument, and that's one of the ways to do it is to look at positive impact over time of cannabis on certain ailments or certain sociological issues or certain conditions like PTSD. We need that research.
I noticed that towards the end of the bill, you have a study set up to see if it affects traffic violations.
I'm sorry, if it affects.
Towards the end of the bill, you mentioned about creating a study that would check on the effect of cannabis in regards to the traffic incidents.
Right.
To see if it's a factor. Why was that put in there?
It's an issue that comes up in state legislatures often because they're the ones who regulate that sort of thing. DUI laws, for example. We know how to test for alcohol to see if you're over the limit, if you're in an accident or you get stopped for bad driving, but testing for marijuana presence or certain drug presence is much less specific and much less sophisticated. So if you can counter that argument with the test there, it takes one more thing off the table for what they use to say we shouldn't legalize it.
Well, there have been studies, and here at Normal, our national deputy director specializes in pulling that research and aggregating it together. And we've seen that the research is clear. State legal cannabis is not correlated with increased traffic fatalities. And in fact, in a lot of legal jurisdictions, post legalization, we see a drop in serious traffic incidents. So, the reefer madness, last hurrah of a lot of the prohibitionists is around traffic safety. And that's just not what we're seeing on the research. And, you pointed out earlier about the other factors that are involved. And then you start to think about money in politics and folks are pushing them. You think about the alcohol industry in Canada. Post legalization, they saw alcohol consumption fall significantly. So there are definitely powers that be that are going to try to sensationalize small talking points and create these boilerplate talking points across the various states as we have these battles. But the fact is, all the research shows when you have a legal state regulated cannabis market, all the negativity that we often hear from the prohibitionists never comes to fruition. The sky has now fallen and Nevada has it.
Yeah, that's why those studies are so important. You talk about the big interest. One of the things that I think you're going to see happen, the more you legalize cannabis, the more you're going to see big pharma wanting to get into it. And big pharma can swoop in with all its money, all its lobbyists, and put a lot of these small dispensaries out of business because they can package it, they can wrap it up in a bow, they can advertise it, and they can take it over once it's legal. So that's something else that's out there on the horizon that you're going to have to deal with.
Now, you mentioned in the bill that 75% of the cannabis industry in this country is the illicit market, or what we sometimes call the gray market or the legacy market. But the point is, it's the folks who are not doing it via legal means.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. And if you legalize it, not only can you regulate it, you can make it safer for the consumer, and you can generate tax revenue for the state or for the community. Those are three real pluses to having it off the black market, where you don't know what you're getting when you buy it. Who knows where the money's going? It's certainly not going into bricks and mortar or jobs or tax revenue. And so those are three big reasons of why you should legalize it.
And yet, the taxation
Gary,
of cannabis.
Gary, I wanted to hop on that for a second. I talked to a lot of folks who are in the legacy market who want to get into the legal market. And this idea of moving from legacy to legal is something that a lot of folks in the DC area are wanting to do. And it just feels like, as I said before, sometimes at these state created systems, the folks who are influencing how the legislation gets written and how the regulatory side of it happens, that's just not possible for folks who actually have the abilities and the experience of growing the plant and putting out quality access. And I think that's a major concern folks have, because for a lot of folks who are cannabis consumers, they want to know that what they're getting is a quality product. And what we've seen from these large multi-state operators that are operating in these margins and trying to be profitable is that they're cutting corners, that they're doing everything from overworking and underpaying their workers to spraying pesticides and buying lab results so that way it can look safe, but it isn't necessarily so. And so we represent cannabis consumers. We've always been the advocate for the consumer. We want to make sure that folks have safe and quality access, which is why, we've advocated for folks being able to unionize the cannabis workforce, but we want to see quality products. And we feel as though as long as these large multi-state operators are dominating the various state industries, we're not getting the amount of quality that we deserve. Is there any federal vehicle or way we can amend legislation to make sure that we can protect small businesses, and that there can be a way for folks to go from the legacy market to the legal market without getting shut out by big business?
Well, most of that is done by regulation at the state level. And so that's where most of the attention has to go. But if you can come up with some way that we might be able to do it federally, I'm sure our caucus would be glad to look at that, because, we like to protect small business, and that's what we need to do. When I first got involved in this in Nevada, we didn't have legal sales or anything. So I visited some of the dispensaries in California and in Colorado and in Arizona to kind of see how they worked. And that old notion of a little head shop with some black lights and a poster of Che Guevara on the wall is just not accurate anymore. These are big operations, and they include agronomists, they include chefs, they include chemists. These are professional people in an industry to try to produce something that's unlike what's been on the market in the past. When you were in college, if you got a nickel bag with a bud in it, it was like big time. Now, if you go and see some of the things that are being grown, it's unbelievable. So it is a big investment when you go into this business, and the return is not nearly as great as people thought it was going to be initially. So I think anything we can do to help small businesses, and that includes the banking, that's a big first step, would be a plus.
A lot of states push social equity as part of their programs to make certain that people who have been more heavily impacted by the war on drugs can get access to the market to become, good tax-paying citizens who have a business of their own and things of that sort. I find it kind of interesting that the old places had posters of Che Guevara, considering how big business got in, and Che was kind of a socialist, from what I understand. So I don't think he was much of a capitalist, and yet we find the current industry highly capitalistic.
Right. Well, you can pick somebody else. You don't like Che Guevara, pick Jim Morrison. I don't care who you pick. I think you get the point I was trying to make.
Indeed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the market continues to evolve. We just want to make certain that, first off, that patients will always have access to it, because, and on a non-taxable basis, because, yeah, I can see getting the adult use market tax the product. Of course, that does allows the legacy market to undercut their price because they're not being taxed. And so that's why a lot of people do go to the legacy market, because there's no taxes there.
Yeah, but that's right.
We do want to make certain that patients.
So if you go to a dispensary, you'll often be surprised that it's not just young people for a good time on the weekend. You find a lot of more senior people who are there buying it for health reasons. But now they're self-prescribing, and you don't know how good that is, how it mixes with other medicines they might be taking. Yeah, it's a short-term feel-good, but wouldn't it be better to have it as part of the whole regimen of drugs that you're taking, or you're dealing with your issues? But yeah, it's people who are using it for those purposes, those medical purposes, not just for recreation. And sometimes people find that surprising when they go to a dispensary.
Well, yeah, we really appreciate you coming on with us. Gary, let's go ahead and wrap up with last questions because I know Congresswoman is very busy and got a lot of things to do. So, Gary, by all means, shoot us off our last question to the Congresswoman.
Yeah, I know that the bill right now is heading to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and we would like to see this bill to go through. I mean, since the Controlled Substance Act in 1972, there's been close to 500 bills that have involved cannabis that have come and have died before the end of Congress. I'd love to see the states 2.0 on that second round to go ahead and move forward. How do you see as the possibility of success first in the Energy and Commerce Committee and going forward?
Well, right now, all the emphasis has been on the DOGE cuts, the rescission of funding. It's been on, just getting government funded through the end of the year. All the budget, all that has taken up all the airspace. So I don't see much policy-oriented legislation necessarily coming through. But you do have the appropriations process that'll happen through this fall and through some of those bills like the VA bill, like the agriculture bill dealing with hemp, maybe the commerce bill. We can get some language in the appropriations bill that will move the issue forward. But I suspect you'll see any kind of big individual bills not passed until the second half of the session. But in the meantime, we just have to keep the drumbeat going. We can't get discouraged, and that's why programs like y'all have and the NORML and the organizations that are out there. We have some of the biggest conventions here in my district in Las Vegas to keep talking about the issue so that we don't get fatigued. I'm a little worried that there's this new emphasis on psychedelics, and I don't want marijuana to get left behind as a stepchild as people get all excited about psychedelics. Let's not forget that we got to get this done too.
Well, as your constituents in Nevada have asked me, and other people around the country, what can we as citizens do to help get your bill across the line?
Well, I think you're doing it. I think just keeping the pressure on, keeping the beating the drum. Anytime there's a good story, letters to the editor are good. Like I said earlier, the people who tell the best story are those who are impacted: the child with epilepsy, the veteran with PTSD, the senior with for pain management, the beagle or the dog that you can bring in and talk about. That's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear numbers. They want to hear stories, and I think that's the best way to sell it. And
by the way, poodles have the highest incidence of epilepsy. Just so you want to know. Not that my daughter works for a veterinarian.
So poodles are real stoners. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely. Poodles for cannabis is going to be a big thing one of these days.
There we go. And Gary, like the Congresswoman said, talking to your member of Congress, sharing your story is important. If you go to normal.org and hit act, we have tons of action alerts. We have ones that go to members of Congress, ones for the various states that we have cannabis legislation moving. So there's a lot of opportunity for folks to go to normal.org and to really learn more about how they can get involved in their state locally and at the congressional level.
That's good. That really makes a difference. So that's great. Thank you for doing that.
Yep. Well, Congresswoman, we really appreciate you joining us. You're welcome back on the show anytime, and we love to see how things move forward in this upcoming session, and then after the midterms, and hopefully we get some traction on this. But we appreciate you, and thanks for jumping into rotation with us this Sunday.
Well, thank you for having me, and let's definitely stay in touch as things move along, because I need your help for us to advocate and get this over the finish line.
Maybe we'll see you at MJ BizCon.
Yep, we'll see you. So, any parting words you want to leave for the folks? Anything you want them to say, or where they can follow you, or get involved in your campaign for re-election?
Well, yeah, it's just DinaTitus.com, and we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and so I wrote an article for the Harvard Law Review about passing this several years ago, and the title was "Puff Puff, Pass the Bill." So that's my message.
Sounds like the plan. All right. Well, thank you, Congresswoman. We really appreciate you. You have a great Sunday.
Thank you.
Yeah. So everyone looking forward to continuing to do what we're doing here at Suncoast Normal, and we're going to jump into the news real quick. I got one big news story today, plain and simple. we need everyone to support our back to school supply drive, which we're going to be at August 9th in Tampa, passing out book bags and school supplies to the kids in need. We have donation locations available at Chillum and Ybor City and St. Petersburg until August 8th. So please bring an unused backpack that you could donate to either Chillum location and unopened school supplies to help the kids in need. We really do appreciate it. And that's all I really got for this weekend. I just want to say, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, go to suncoastnormal.org, become a member, donate, and we'll catch you next week in the rotation.
Absolutely. Peace out.